There she is, the Burger-mobile.
Jake, is it really you? Are you really here?
You know it, baby. But first, I gotta hug my best friend.
I am C3PO, Human Cyborg Relations.
I'm thinking maybe you and I could partner up.
Thanks. Thank you.
Well, good morning, Church of the Springs. I'm so glad that you're here worshiping with us this morning, whether or not you're here in the room or you're online. Welcome. We are so thankful that you've chosen this cold, rainy Sunday to come worship with us. So a few things about me. Yes, I am the student ministries pastor here at the Springs. I've been on staff here for 5 years now, which is a crazy thing to think about. I've been married now 10 years. I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Spent my whole life there. I went to school out in Missouri. Fun fact about my marriage is my wife and I we grew up together in Colorado Springs, but we were at rival high schools. And the crazy thing is we never met. We actually met when we were in college in Missouri. And I thank the Lord for that because she would have never dated me. And so it's real. So the beginning of our relationship, me trying to convince her to like me, it was a long process, but it worked out, all right? So, but we have been happily married, like I said, for 10 years now, which is crazy. But there's one thing I've learned is that relationships can be a little bit messy. So we're in this series on the lost art of friendship. And we believe that God calls us into a relationship with himself as God the Father, and he did that through Jesus Christ, but he also calls us, because of that, into a relationship with each other, and so it might take some of our focus to make those relationships great. And you all know that can be messy. Nothing to me says messy, though, in relationships like a good old classic holiday, right? When you're around with your family. So it's 2016, and I was excited because I just graduated college and I was brought on staff at a church plant in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So that's my home. My whole family is there. I'm pumped because I'm going to be around them more. And so I'm just like, I can spend intentional time with them like God would want me to. And so it was such a good thing. And there was one person in my family I was really and particularly excited to be around, and that was my grandfather. So my grandfather, he was a Vietnam veteran. He was so good at what he did in Vietnam that when he got out of it, the Secret Service actually tried to recruit him. He didn't do that. He went into sales. But just to put it lightly, he was a scary dude, all right? And armed at all times, but he's this John Wayne type of guy. You always knew where you stood with him. Sometimes you knew especially well where you stood with him. But he was a great guy. And he would literally give the shirt off his own back for anybody in the family. Like, he just loved deeply. I respected him so much, and I was so excited to spend some intentional time with him. So we're back home, and it's Thanksgiving time, and he invites everybody in the family over to his house, and I'm excited. Thanksgiving is one of my favorite holidays, and the food just smells incredible. Everyone starts getting their plates together. We start sitting around the table. I've had like 13 deviled eggs, so I'm like getting warmed up, right? I'm ready for this. And so I'm sitting there, and I sit across from the table from my grandfather, and he starts looking around the room and making eye contact with everybody, which was strange, right? Because my mind is thinking, what is happening? No, we're not the type of family to just wait and look around the room. We're the type of family, like, as soon as you sit, you start eating. And so there's this pause, and I'm thinking, is Grandpa getting sentimental? Oh my gosh, like, this is crazy. And then I start even dreaming, and I'm like, maybe all that intentional time, it's starting to pay off. Like, is Grandpa gonna pray? And to me, that's like a parting of the Red Sea miraculous moment. Like, the Lord, he's working, right? So my heart, I don't know what's happening, and I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at Grandpa, and he's looking around the room, and then he looks right at me, and he says, all right, starting with you, you're gonna tell me who you voted for, and we're just gonna make our way around the room. I thought to myself, I can't run far, he's armed. So I did what we all would do, I lied. I told him exactly what he wanted to hear, and we went around the room, and everybody else did the same exact thing. And there were people who couldn't even vote, but they're like, this is who I voted for. And I'm like, no, you didn't, you can't vote. And the whole point is, though, is my whole family, we were not ready for that level of honesty. See, honesty is tricky. It is something that if you don't have a relationship, it's hard to work around. And it can be brutal. But here's something that's significant about honesty. Honesty is a crucial part of any relationship. Like, honesty is a crucial ingredient. If you want to grow a relationship, it has to exist. A better way of maybe saying this is your relationships are only as deep as they are honest. You want deeper relationships, you want to connect with people more. How honest are they? So this is a hard dynamic for us to wrestle with because it's important, it's tricky, it's messy. See, God, he gives us his version of honesty, or this is how we define honesty. We say honesty is truth spoken in love. Maybe a better way to put this is in the example of Jesus. In John, this is what he says. It says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The Word being Jesus. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. All right, so honesty is full of grace and truth. Jesus lived full of grace and truth, and he balanced it perfectly. And if we want to follow Jesus, if we want to be like Christ as we are called to be, that means that we all have to wrestle with this balance of grace and truth. But that's tricky, right? We know that navigating that is not easy. There's one author, this is what he says about this balance. He says that truth without love is brutality. Again, truth without love is brutality. And love without truth is hypocrisy. In other words, truth by itself will destroy a relationship. Absolutely just wreck it. But grace by itself will enable. It will enable wrongdoing. It will let someone just walk all over you with no absolute knowledge of their bad behavior. So how do we navigate this tension? Because clearly, if we're going to be honest in this situation, in a relationship, it's going to bring attention. It's going to bring conflict. So what do we do? Well, we're going to look at the story of these two great men in the New Testament. There's the Apostle Paul and then Barnabas. Now, if you know your New Testament well, that you know that Paul, he might have become great, but he didn't start off that way. He actually starts off as a guy named Saul, and to say that he was not a great Christian is like an understatement. In fact, he was so against the church that he riled up a bunch of people together. They got so mad that they oversaw the persecution and martyrdom of the very first Christian. Paul was in that. And so when he converted, when he encounters the Lord and he changes his life and he decides to follow Jesus forever, the other apostles, when it comes to trusting Paul, are kind of reserved. They're literally like, that guy? Y'all know what he did, right? But there's this other guy named Barnabas, who Barnabas is son of encouragement. It's his name, that's what it means. And he goes to the apostles, he's like, hey, this stuff with Paul, it's legit. He is who he says he is. He's legit now. You should trust him. And so he speaks up for Paul, and he gets Paul into the room. He gets him a seat at the table. And these two become best friends. They serve in ministry together. They plant churches together. They go all over Asia Minor together. They have highs and lows. They're persecuted together. They preach the gospel together. And they're so good at what they do. these two friends, they're so good at what they do that the Greeks actually kind of misunderstand what's happening. They just know they're powerful. And this is actually what they say about Paul and Barnabas. So in Acts, they say, they decided that Barnabas was the Greek god Zeus. This guy's powerful, he's strong, he's big, he's mighty, he's probably had a deep voice. You can see him out in a crowd. This Barnabas, so he's gotta be Zeus, right? He's speaking with such authority and power. And then Paul was Hermes. Hold on. Like Hermes, the little guy? Yeah, the little guy. And why did they think he was Hermes? Because he was the chief speaker. Oh, so he talks a lot. All right, so you got Paul, the big guy, Barnabas, the big guy, big, booming, strong, commanding, and you got Paul, the little guy, who talks a lot. So just to kind of help me with this imagery, we live in a golden age. We have AI now, state-of-the-art AI. And I just wanted to see, like, what could it look like if Paul and Barnabas were just doing their missions, they were working together, just to help us conceptually understand. So I used state-of-the-art AI to kind of generate an image of what this possibly could have looked like. Check this out. We have the technology, all right? Yeah, that's actually Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito from the movie Twins, poorly photoshopped over an image. We worked hard on that. I'm pretty proud of it. But that's what I like to think about it, right? They were together, these two men, their friends, taking on the world in all of their differences, doing great ministry together. So what happens? Well, the relationships are deep. And you know, with depth comes conflict. So what leads to their conflict? Well, let's check this out. This is in Acts. This is their conflict. After some time, Paul said to Barnabas, hey, let's go back and visit each city where we previously preached the word of the Lord to see how the new believers are doing. Barnabas agrees and wants to take along John Mark. So Paul's like, hey, let's go see how those churches we worked with, how they're doing. Let's encourage them and then keep moving. Barnabas is like, yeah, let's absolutely do that. But I want to take this guy, John Mark. But Paul disagreed strongly. Uh-oh. See, Paul disagrees strongly. This isn't like, well, I don't know. This is like, absolutely not. There is no way we are bringing this dude with us. And why does he feel that way? Well, since John Mark has deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in their work. So this John Mark guy's a liability. Paul doesn't want to take him with him because he abandoned them. There's no way he's going to take him. So their disagreement was so sharp that they separated. When we say sharp, that's like to the point of anger. There's no coming together on this issue. And Barnabas took John Mark with him and sailed for Cyprus. Paul chose Silas, and as he left, the believers entrusted to him the Lord's gracious care. Then he traveled throughout Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches there. Okay, so there's not like a happy-go-lucky moment here where everyone's like, they sing Kumbaya and get the band back together. So what happened? And how does this help us when it comes to navigating the tension of conflict in our relationships? Well, I think there's three things we can get from this. And the first thing is this. There are three sides to every conflict. If you think about it, there are three sides to every single conflict that we have. There's three stories, three sides of the story. There's yours, there's mine, and there's what really happened. Paul's upset, right? There is no way. Like, how could you even bring up John Mark? Are you crazy? If you know your New Testament well, you also know that John Mark didn't just say, hey, I'm not going to help Paul out anymore and leave him. He actually opposed him. He riled people up against him. That's the guy you want to bring with me? They're going into a life or death situation. They're going to suffer for ministry. They need people that have their backs. And Barnabas, are you crazy? And Barnabas is sitting here on his side of the story. Like, hey, what happened to our past can be forgiven? What happened to meeting people where they are, not where they should be? They're both right, if you think about it. So what's going on here? I kind of like to think about this as like in a triangle. So there's like one side of the story, the other side, and then what's really happening at the bottom. And I'm a football guy. I love Super Bowl Sunday is like one of my favorite holidays. And so I'd like to think about it in those terms. And so to kind of draw it up for you, what happened this past Super Bowl Sunday, let's bring this up. We have this drawn out for you. All right, so there's this 49ers, and they look good, really good, like the Lord has anointed them. And then you've got, on the other opposing side, the Swifties, the Chiefs, and yes, the refs. I said what I said, all right? A lot of missed holding calls on that one. But the reality, the truth, underlying all of this is who won the NFL. It was the most highly viewed game in all of history. It was the most highly viewed event in all of history. There's a picture of Roger Goodell literally thanking Taylor Swift like, thank you so much. We have unlocked a new power in you, right? So, I mean, what I'm really trying to say is there's two sides of this. There's my side, which is on one side, your side, and then truth. I think oftentimes we just expect our story to be correct, and there might be some truth in that, but something's happening in your relationship. And I think sometimes we forget where we're coming from. Oftentimes we start to get comfortable in our faith. We start to feel good about what we're doing. Like, man, we've really made changes. The God is doing great things in us. But then we run into this danger. It's subtle, but this danger of self-righteousness. We forget what God has done in our lives. And the Apostle Paul, he's sitting here like, I could never trust John Mark. His background is too bad. He opposed me. He opposed the church. How could you do that? And I just imagine Barnabas sitting there like, dude, that's you. That's your story. I'm doing the same exact thing for John Mark that I did for you with the apostles. Sometimes when we get stuck in our own self-righteousness, we get into this mindset. See, we want people to judge us by our intentions and not by our actions. And then we judge others by their actions and not their intentions. I meant well, right? Don't judge me by what happened. I meant well by that. So how do we get through this? How do we stop living in our own self-righteousness and gain back our story? Well, we need to slow down and we need to listen. Which leads me to my next point. Listening more than you speak avoids conflict. Again, listening more than you speak avoids conflict. One person put it this way: listen more than you talk. Nobody ever learned anything by hearing themselves speak. Ain't that the truth? Right? You are not revealing new information that you hold. A biblical way of saying this actually is this in James, and James is speaking to an audience who is in conflict, and this is what he tells them. He says, understanding this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. This isn't a suggestion, by the way. James is like, have you thought about this? He's saying, no, you as Christ followers are to be like this when you are in conflict. But not me. No, not me. I do the opposite. I'm quick to speak, slow to listen, and quick to be angry. And when we get to the point of anger, all of a sudden we begin to lose why we were angry to begin with. We begin to lose ourselves in this conflict. When I was in college, I helped pay the way through that. I worked in a small local church, and I also worked in a restaurant, and so I served tables. And I would say I was pretty good. In fact, I was amazing. Every server will tell you that, right? I'm the best server. I've never let anybody down. I still have nightmares about ranch, I forgot. But we will always say I was the best. And there was a couple that came in, and man, they were just, something was off. And I just wanted to do everything I could to make their experience enjoyable. When they sat down, I really prided myself. I just want to be as hospitable to you as humanly possible. I could tell over the course of this meal, though, that was not going to happen. I was not going to win them over, and I don't know why. Eventually, I'm making sure their drinks are filled, their food looks incredible, the experience, I'm trying not to talk to them too much, all this stuff. And I get to the end of this meal, and I'm gonna deliver this guy's check, and I give it to him, he gives it back, I go back to the cashier, we run it, and I'm giving it back to him. And as I'm handing it to him, I notice he's shaking. He didn't start off shaking, he's shaking now though. And I'm just like, what is happening? So I, drop the check off and like, sir, as he grabs it, you have an amazing day. And he looks at me, and I could see just this anger fomenting, and it'll be amazing now that we're finally rid of you. What'd I do? Right? Like, I have no idea what happened. And everyone's kind of looking around. My manager's like, dude, what did you do? And I'm back, I don't know. Like, he's so upset. But that's how we get, right? I don't even think he understood what made him mad with to begin with. But here he is in a restaurant yelling at somebody. And that's what ends up happening to us. We lose ourselves in the story because we're constantly just thinking about how we were wronged, and it builds to this anger and this tension, and then we don't even know why we're mad anymore. We've lost it. Like, I think about, we get up in the morning and we're late, so we don't have time to get coffee. We get in the car, the tank is empty. We're rushing to work, traffic is terrible. And this continues all day long until eventually you explode on somebody at Publix, or even worse, your wife or someone you are in a relationship with. And they're sitting there thinking, what'd I do? Do they not know I was late to work? I couldn't get coffee? Right? We lose ourselves, and we lose why we're mad to begin with. And so maybe we just stopped for just a second, just a pause, just to listen to somebody else. The truth is, Barnabas had every right to actually force the situation. He's the reason why Paul got a seat at the table. You know what he could have done? He could have said, Paul, hey, listen, bud, you're being a little bit crazy right now. You're going to take John Mark, and you're going to like it. Right? I'm in charge. He didn't do that, though. What we see here is Barnabas listens. And then he acts, and they departed. So when it comes to different perspectives in our arguments, in our fighting, how often do we go into a conversation just going to listen? Or are we so caught up when we get into that conversation, we're just trying to prove our points, why we are right. And when we go into a conversation like that, we wonder why our relationships suffer. We wonder why things fall apart. Don't they just know how they wronged me? Maybe you're the cause of conflict. Like, maybe you're the point of contention in the way that you've been living or acting. Well, that leads me to my last point. It's never too late to make things right. It is never too late to make things right. Reconciliation is the foundation of our faith. Like, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us to bring us into relationship with God. So that is the foundation of everything that we believe. I gotta be honest though, if you're trying to reconcile with someone, and you just give, and you give, and you give, and you give, and you work, and you have the conversations, you have the self-reflection, you do all those things, and that person doesn't reciprocate, it's not on you. You've done everything you possibly could. And if you continue to allow that, we've snuck back into that grace element where your grace is actually giving them permission to hurt you and to sin. So reconciliation is a two-way street. Think about this conflict between Paul and Barnabas. I don't know if it's my personality or what, but I always am like, what would it have been like to be in the room while these two amazing guys, these two giants of the faith who have been working together so diligently are arguing, and John Mark is sitting right there. Like, I think of Paul like, John Mark, are you crazy? Why would you even say his name? That guy is the worst. And John Mark's in the corner like, okay, Paul, take it easy. Like, you're coming out strong on this one. And then Barnabas is like, yeah, that guy stinks, but he's not that bad. Barnabas, you're supposed to be encouragement, man. Like, do I need to leave the room so you guys can figured this out? Like, imagine how terrible that would feel to have all of your mistakes on display for everyone to see. Some of you don't have to imagine that, though. Right? Some of you might be in this room and your mistakes are on display for everyone to see. Well, here's what I need you to know. It is never too late to make things right. It's never too late. So what happens with John Mark? He was accused of abandoning Paul, and he was right. He did abandon Paul, and he caused a lot of problems. And we don't really know how they got back together, but somehow John Mark and Paul end up together again. But this time, we learn something significant. See, Paul, he preached the gospel to the point of causing contentions, and he ends up in jail. And who's there with him? John Mark. John Mark didn't give up on him. He followed through. The very last letter in Paul's life, literally the last thing we see written in his life, 2 Timothy, we get this interesting piece of scripture. This is what we see, 2 Timothy. He's in jail, and he says, only Luke is with me. Like, this is looking like the end for Paul. Bring Mark with you when you come, for he'll be helpful to me in my ministry. So this Mark went from someone that Paul couldn't trust to, in his last days, he's asking, can you bring Mark? He's useful to me. By the way, when Mark comes out there, Paul's in Rome, he's in prison. When Mark comes out there, he ends up writing the Gospel of Mark. Like a gospel, a significant one at that. See, if God can do that for Paul, if he can do that for John Mark, if he can do that for Barnabas, he can do that for you. See, John Mark's failure was on display for all to see. I get what that's like, because that's where we're all at. We believe that our failure was on display for all to see when Jesus took it with him on that cross. That it's our failure that put him there, and he took it willingly. And so wherever you're failing in your marriage, if you're failing with how you raise your kids, if you're failing in your finances, in your jobs, if you're failing with you as privately and people don't even know it, and you just feel like it's on display, like God is seeing this, like the world is seeing this, and I have failed and I will continue to fail, and there's nothing that can change me, I promise you this, Jesus knows this, and he went to the cross because he knew that, and he took all of that so that you could have a full life. He took that with him into the grave, and out of that grave comes a hope, comes joy, comes restoration, and that is significant because that means life has changed. And that is what is available to us through Jesus Christ. Your failure is on display. Welcome to the church. That's where we live, because only he is good enough. And if you want that, if you want new life in Jesus Christ, if you want your failures to be made right, and you want reconciliation, you can do that here today in this room. Pray with me. Lord Jesus, I give you my failures. I want to be close to you, God. So I give you my sins and my doubts and my shame. God, I give you my failures. And I make you Lord and Savior of my life, freeing me from my past and my present, and giving me a new future. It's in your holy and precious name I pray. Amen.